All right?
Are you all right?
I'm going to holler at you to give her, and you're going to have to give her all the way up the hill. And then, okay, and then you're just going to go straight up like you're going to go up on top. But all I care about is getting my truck on top, and then I'll put it in park, and I'll come out and grab you. I'll take over for this. Okay, go! Good job. Nothing comes easy. There's something very enjoyable to me about taking a path less traveled and driving to some small town somewhere and observing firsthand the rural farming and ranching life, especially this time of year. For whatever reason, when I see these ranches and farms out in the middle of nowhere, I often think about the first person that decided that this was the place. This is the place he was going to homestead. This was the place he would bring his family. Regardless of the obvious challenges in front of him, this is the place where he felt his future was bright. Now, hundreds of years later, many of these ranches are still ran by the descendants of the original person. I find myself thinking about what kind of person you had to be to make it out in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing cold, when the greatest concern you might have is how the animals are going to get fed that evening. And naturally, from the comforts of my warm home, I find myself wondering if I have what it would take to survive in a situation like that. Many of those early settlers had to break away from family, and in many cases, they never saw their family face to face ever again. In some cases, I drive past an old, abandoned log cabin that has seen better days, yet still that cabin represents a bygone era and a bygone people that gave it all for a piece of land. I'll be the first to admit that I probably spend too much time reading old Western fiction books, but these are the things that I think about when I'm driving. Now, it took me less than 2.5 hours to drive the 170 miles that I needed to pick up the new frame and axles that we'll use on Rhets' truck. After getting the truck frame loaded up, I grabbed me a little bit of lunch, then backtracked right back to Red Poppy Ranch. I found that truck frame on the local internet. After talking with the previous owner, I figured out that the axles were geared exactly the way that I wanted them, with a 354 gear. He also informed me that the axles had very low miles on them because the truck frame came from a local high school where it was used for demonstration. And while all the other parts were taken off the truck, the axles were never touched. Once I get the siding finished on the front of the shop, Rhett and I will swap those axles back into his truck and get it one step closer to being roadworthy. When the weather's nice, I prefer to be outside. And by nice, I mean the sun comes out once in a while. While there's obviously still projects to do inside the house, I'll save those projects for another day, specifically a day when the weather turns bad, because I know that kind of weather is coming. In the meantime, by getting the siding hung, this gets the wood off the concrete floor in the shop and makes room for another 60 pieces, but it also helps me figure out just in fact how much I need. Thank goodness I'm married to a woman that understands that things are going to change. She knows I'll get the inside projects done, and she knows I'm going to get them done soon. But she also understands that around here things constantly change. By getting Rhett's truck roadworthy, we no longer have to worry about Callie and Reed and Rhett getting safely to school. While it can be a bit of a chore swapping axles on a truck, if the components are the same, it's really not that hard. I've been trying to get a canopy for the 6x6, so on those cold and snowy days when I need to use it to plow, it can be protected from the elements a little bit. 3 different times I had to order the canopy, and finally the right one arrived, and I kept it inside the house all night to keep it warm and pliable, and even still it was a tremendous challenge to get it halfway on the Ranger. But hopefully over time, and as the weather warms up, it will stretch out just a bit more. I've talked about it before, but I'll talk about it one more time. A dually truck is a purpose-built vehicle for me, meaning there's only one reason why I would go out and find a dually truck, and that is to tow with. If I was hauling a stock trailer every day, or if I was towing a heavy piece of equipment every day, I would without a doubt have a dually. But every other factor in our life requires just the opposite, starting with the narrow road that we live on. To have my 16-year-old driving a truck that's 2 feet wider than a normal truck is asking for problems. There are portions of our road where there's barely enough room for one car to get by, let alone a dually in another car. On top of that, with a dually, you now have 6 tires instead of 4 that you're constantly wearing out. I can say the same with the crew cab Chevy. While there was nothing wrong with the axles that were on that truck, and the hubs that I just had to order to convert the front axle back to a single wheel axle cost a small fortune. So it would have been much easier to leave that truck a dually. But I flat do not have a use for a dually truck. While converting both trucks back to single-wheel axles is quite a task, under the circumstances it's completely worth the effort. The end result is with those 2 trucks, that's just how I want to do them. There may be others that would be totally satisfied with these trucks as dualies, but I'm willing to put the effort in to make those 2 dually trucks back into single-wheel trucks. At the end of this video, Cedar and I sit down for our usual question and answer, and the topic was all about leaving the big city for a small town. I'm not sure if I completely made my point in the theory behind leaving the big city for the small town, but let me just simply clarify. Small towns aren't for everybody, but in the current setting that we have, in this great country in which I live, living in the big city is proving to be quite costly in so many ways, starting with safety and security. From my perspective, this might be the most important thing. The way that I see it, the moment that Cedar and I started a family, I became responsible for more than just myself. Taking that into consideration, the longer that we lived in the city, I felt like our safety and security was going away. But this is not the only reason we chose to live in a small town. Living in the right small town oftentimes is more affordable than living in the big city, but also it can be more difficult to make a living. These are factors that we took into consideration when we first moved from the big city to a small town. There's also such a thing as too small of a town. We learned that in our mid-20s. So the plan is to get all the 1x12 hung today. I'm not going to start messing with the batten strips until everything is up. It was threatening to snow there for a little bit. I really didn't want to be way up on the ladder if the concrete was slippery, but it's not snowing. So I'm going to try and get this all done. And then the next couple of days, all I'm going to do is spend putting all the trim work and the batten strips up. I still have about a third of the 1x12 left, and so if I have enough, I'm just going to keep going across the front, but the main thing is to get it all hung. We figured out what size worked for us, and we pursued that until we found the right small town. Whenever there are less people living in a particular area, oftentimes the crime goes down, meaning less people, less crime. But there are also small towns that do not reflect this. This is one of those things that we looked for when we began searching for the right small town to move to. One of the other factors that we took into consideration is how far away is the nearest big city. Is it too close or is it too far away? Is it close enough to go to when we need particular things, yet still far enough away to create that buffer? And again, this was one of the factors that was taken into consideration. Are we near a college town? This was also a factor. Regardless of how I make a living, are there opportunities for our kids to make a decent living? Do we live in a community of like-minded people? Meaning, if something went sideways, would we be standing alone in our beliefs, or would we be standing next to our neighbor? For the first time in a very long time, people are being forced to reevaluate some of these things. And my challenge to you is to take it serious. I would also challenge you to make a change if change is needed. If you change nothing, nothing changes. Maybe it's time for you to reevaluate where the best place is for you and yours, or maybe everything is just fine where you're at. All right.
Okay, now we have another new name. Now it's called the Chili Chat.
Chili Chat.
So it is definitely chilly. And for those of you who enjoyed the Chili Chat, thanks for listening. And if not, you can go ahead and fast forward the next couple minutes. You don't have to listen to it. But we appreciate those who do. We appreciate those who email us and who ask us questions and get involved in our lives. And we appreciate that you let us take the time to answer your questions for you. So
we can only speak to what we've been, our experiences. And so this is an area that we obviously experienced. The process of leaving the big city for a small town, we happen to be ahead of the curve, thank goodness. And while over the last year, many people have made that exodus. And look, I can, it's terrifying. I can only imagine some of these people thinking that their livelihoods are gone and they have to make some changes.
And there's a lot of people who thoroughly enjoy the big city. Like they don't mind it, and small towns are definitely not for everybody, and we totally get that too. But for Heath's brain that goes 90 miles an hour all day long, every day, even when he sleeps, his brain works better in a small town. Slower paced life in the middle of nowhere, and he just functions.
Yeah, I think it goes back to control. I can remember when our oldest daughter, Sage, was born, and Cedar literally brought her home from the hospital the very first night. I got out of bed like 2 or 3 times and went in and put my hand on her chest and made sure she was breathing, because all of a sudden we are now responsible for another life. And so as the provider and protector, the second that I'm in a busy setting with my wife and kids, or just myself, I suppose, my anxiety goes up. I can remember going to Disneyland with the 3 older kids, 13 or 14 years ago, and you insisting we had to do this as a family, and I didn't enjoy it. I made it clear to Cedar that if I ever went back, it would be too soon. Well, she loved it, and the kids loved it.
And we made it very clear that next time I would go back, it'll be just
I wouldn't be there. Yeah, and in that moment throughout that day, we nearly lost Rhett, who was like 3 years old. He wandered off, and it turned into a panic. And so
you were ready to go home by then. And I was just like, whatever, let's go. Let's keep going.
We'll find him. We'll find him. Yeah, and this is why we're
a cousin or something like that.
This is why we're a good balance. And part of the process of us leaving the big city for the small town started when my parents retired to southern Utah. And we went and lived with him for 6 months. And then I was offered a job back.
We had 2 little kids at the time. So.
2 little kids. We were mid-20s.
Yeah.
I was offered a management job back that we felt like we had to take.
And it was a beautiful area. We loved it. We just knew in our hearts that it wasn't the right place to be at that time.
A little bit too small. 1,000 people. A little bit too small. We moved back to Queen Creek, stayed there for another 4 or 5 years. And and then moved up to Snowflake, which was what, 6,000 or 7,000 people.
But my grandma had grew up there, was born and raised there, and Heath's grandma had lived there for a little bit. But we also had connections to the White Mountains. Like, that's where as a family and as a kid,
Spent a lot of time.
we camped there all summer. Every summer, that's what we did, as we camped as a family, and you as well.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in those. And the truth is, we watched Arizona as the Metro Phoenix area grew and grew and grew. The White Mountains on the weekends, especially the holiday weekends, became busier and busier and busier.
And it's still like that too.
Oh, it's even worse. Yeah. Things are always changing. There's too many people for me down there in Arizona, but yet we have the most important people in our life are back there. And so,
but once you get a taste of like the slower paced life, and like when we walk outside in the morning and it's like totally calm and quiet, and actually when I just go out there by myself, it is like okay, everything's going to be okay. Your body just is like,
for sure, this
is home. I can get through this life.
Yeah, I've said before that the most peace I've found in my life were always in places where people hadn't been, and
especially in nature, in the mountains.
That's all I'm talking about, is in nature. And now, in light of everything that's happening, you could not pay people to go back to these big cities. You're seeing people literally leaving by the tens of thousands, to the point where real estate values are going down in these big cities. The most valuable real estate in the country is on the coasts. And now you're seeing that real estate for the first time in a long time starting to turn. New York, for example, you couldn't give an apartment away in New York if you had to. And so the city can be fun for a minute, I suppose. It's where my favorite place is to get the food. My favorite.
Hey, I thought I was your favorite
only
cook.
When I'm away from home, when I get my favorite Thai food or whatever it is. But it comes down to safety and security. And if I'm the provider and protector that I think I am, I have an obligation to protect my wife and kids. And right before we moved to Idaho, our cars got broken into a couple different times, and it was out of my control. I had to call the police and hope for the best, and nothing was ever recovered.
Control is such a big word, though. You said control, but it's not really control. It's more like,
it's peace of mind.
Peace of mind. It's like you need something to calm you down a little bit. That's why you have me.
For sure. But I don't worry about what's going to happen to my wife and kids here. What I worry about is the road. Is the road in good enough condition? And so
you have worries. It's just different worries.
Yeah, it's not worries that typically keep me awake.
And then I
at
have
night.
different worries about you. Like somebody asked if I worry about you when you work outside by yourself. Absolutely. But most of the time, I am right next to him, even though I'm not on the video. I am in the area, and
it's just close by.
And I know what to do if something happens.
There are small towns. There's definitely a balance to this, right? Some people would call a community of 25,000 people a small town if you come from a place of 7 million people. 25,000 people to me is too much, too busy. So we recognized long ago the importance of a slower pace of life. And
for us and our family.
Yes, and we made the efforts to get there, and we've never looked back. This is a great time to reevaluate just, in fact, what's important and what's best for you and yours. But again, all we can offer is our perspective. But what I should probably say, go ahead.
Oh, so just the biggest thing is, if you have a goal, you sit down with your spouse or your significant
Pros and
whatever,
cons.
and you figure out what you guys want to do, and you do whatever you can to get there.
Yeah.
And that is the
And you work
true
towards it. You
happiness.
work towards it.
Yeah.
This Sunday's video, hopefully all of the board and batten is done on this side. I can't get more siding. Part of the reason I've stopped some of the projects inside is I can't pile up more siding until I've used what I have. Otherwise, it's going to get in the way of hanging drywall.
And we have to order more.
We have to order
And
more.
we don't know how much we need yet.
And he's only willing to cut about 60 pieces at a time.
And it's like 3 weeks out after we order it.
And on top of that, when the weather's halfway decent outside, I'm going to work outside. Cedar knows this, because soon enough the weather's going to be bad enough that I'm going to get serious with the list of things inside the house, and we'll get it finished. And thank heavens, she's a wife that understands that, and she knows that it'll get done when the time comes.
No, we talk about it. It's not an untalked about subject. And thank heavens, I know you will get it done.
Dang right.
I just need to get a bigger whip.
Bigger whip. Okay. We hope you guys are safe.
Have a good week.